Finally, let me say something about last week's debate. This is one of the unique things about our course that tries to increase the level and quality of student involvement. And I thought we had a great debate. Here are some things that I thought went well in the debate on the American Revolution. Amy did an outstanding job for the affirmative team. She opened with multiple attacks on taxes, the lack of parliamentary representation, and the abuse of colonists by British militia stationed in the colonies. Those soldiers were sent there to protect America and maintain law and order. However, the colonists came to regard them as an oppressive, occupying force. Her closing argument was equally strong, and an effective rhetorical device. She connected her remarks to the July 4th anniversary, and I thought that was great. Paul, reading Paul's comments, you can see that the fireworks were really flying in Paul's remarks. His exchanges with worthy opponents gave me the impression that he was really engaged in a true debate. Many students made good arguments, but Paul's was best on rebuttal and cross-examination. In other words, on the attack. His comeback to the argument that taxes were necessary to defray the costs of defending the colonies during the French and Indian War was magnificent. He pointed out that the British prolonged the war, that it was international in scope, which is why people outside of the United States refer to it as the 7 Years' War, that the British were partially compensated by the French with land in North America that, ironically, prohibited the expansion of colonies, and that the trade restrictions placed on the colonies greatly limited their economic development. Sarah made an heroic effort to represent the British side in this debate. Remember, this was an intellectual exercise in which participants were assigned to a team rather than expressing their preferences. Sarah focused on what the British saw as their right to tax Englishmen in the colonies that they established and protected. This arrangement was to them both legal and appropriate. I am surprised that no one brought up the question of virtual representation. The British Parliament was not structured like our Congress, where politicians represent certain states or districts in America. British leaders were presumed to represent all English subjects, those in Britain and those in the colonies. Therefore, to them, it appeared that the Americans were requesting special rights and more representation than normal Englishmen, even those in England. Susan laid out a very logical argument comparing the necessity of British taxes to the federal, state, and local taxes that we as Americans are required to pay today. David did a good job of coordinating his arguments with those of Susan and other members of the negative team. To the extent that they saw good, to that extent, they showed good teamwork. However, I'm afraid that the tax argument did not probe deeper. For example, no one pointed out that the dreaded Stamp Act of 1765 was repealed the next year, largely the result of the economic boycott of British goods led by colonial women. That suggests that proven non-violent methods were available. The famed tea tax that led to the Boston Tea Party was in fact a tax cut, as was brought up in the exam as well, compared to earlier taxes on tea. It merely exempted a struggling British company and would have cut into the profits of smuggling business people like John Hancock. Also, how could a tax repealed in 1765 be cited as a cause of a revolution that took place 10 years later in 1776? The cause and effect relationship seems a little weak. Instead, Jefferson described it in the Declaration of Independence in the terms of John Locke as a long chain of abuses, as opposed to one specific thing. No one mentioned the deleted portion of the Declaration that you read, which happened to be the essay question on the exam. Samantha was a strong advocate for the negative, where some of her teammates seemed reluctant to criticize the colonies. She was spirited, passionate, and most importantly, substantive. She stressed the fact that the colonies were largely part of Great Britain, they considered themselves to be Englishmen, and they were obligated to obey English law. She used the analogy of the relationship between a parent and a child. In fact, King George regarded the American colonies as spoiled children who needed to be spanked for the good of the empire. In retrospect, this was both a political and military mistake. However, she argued to win and greatly helped her team. Finally, the alternative side. Perhaps the alternative team had the hardest task because their position is more hypothetical. Yet, Trevor, Janet, and Maria, who gave a well thought out opening, attempted to show that there were alternatives to the war that were available to both sides. Carissa provided the most concrete examples of how they might have resolved the taxation issue. She suggested that Britain could have insisted on greater revenue from the colonies, but have allowed the colonies to determine how best to raise the money. She also reminded us that this war was not simply about money or taxes, that there were important social and cultural forces at work too. Even without the taxes, Americans were beginning to feel that they were a different people. So, all in all, that was a great debate. Most of you did well on this second exam, and I encourage you to keep up the good work. You have 2 chapters to read this week and 2 chapters next week before your third exam. Finally, I want to make an offer for those of you who are interested in extra credit. A number of you have written me asking me what can you do to either raise your grade or to get some extra credit. If you do anything this summer that is of historical relevance, that is visiting some place that has historical importance, or if you do some outside reading, you're welcome to write a report about what you've read or what you've done or what you've seen this summer that is relevant to American history. And if you do that, I'll be happy to give you some extra credit. But please submit that before the 9th week of the course. That is not during the last week of the course when things are too busy. So again, I hope you're enjoying the course and keep up the good work. Thank you.